the absolute hysterics among a section of the fan base, a vocal minority, I would say now at this stage, with respect to the news that the Acolyte has been cancelled. It's just been utterly ridiculous. The show that was reviled by most fans for very poor writing, it played fast and loose with canon specifically to insert modern identity politics, which have proven time and time again to be unpopular with audiences. Performances were uninspired. Characters were just lacking. They were uninteresting. The show lacked heart, charm, fun. In my opinion, it got one season too many. Unless, of course, the fan campaign to have it renewed is successful. I don't care. Maybe it will be. Stranger things have happened, but it looks like season 1 will be it for the Acolyte. Now, I want to bring up this article. This is from Cosmic Book News. Matt McGloin wrote this. The Acolyte season finale scores lowest Star Wars ratings. Check out the viewership ratings. Season 2 is in doubt. Indeed. So this is the key. The ratings for the first episode of a new show are typically higher, but also you would expect a bump in ratings for the season finale, because the season finale is an important episode in any season, because it's where most of the stories are going to get tied up, so people tune in. But The Acolyte had the lowest rated season finale for a Star Wars series. That means interest was not increasing as the season went on. It was on a downward trajectory. As a result, that's not the kind of show that would typically get renewed. Empire had this article: The Acolyte deserved a season 2, and Star Wars will be poorer without it. Well, why would it deserve a season 2 if the ratings were so low? The ratings have to matter, don't they? They're not some arbitrary thing. Ultimately, the ratings for a show are a reflection of the popularity of that show. The ratings were among the lowest of a Star Wars series. That's why it got cancelled. It's a very expensive series to make, and that cost cannot be justified by the poor viewership figures each episode was bringing in. There was little demand for The Acolyte, aside from a vocal minority of the fans. And to those fans who were disappointed, hey, I feel your pain. There's lots of shows I liked that got cancelled, but they too had low ratings. There's nothing much that can be done about that. So I'm going to read a little bit on this article. It says, no Star Wars story has dug into the idea of a certain point of view quite like The Acolyte, the all-original High Republic era series devised by Leslie Headland, in which a Jedi cover-up spawns disastrous consequences for all involved. Across its first and now only season, the show presented a series of shifting viewpoints on a situation with no clear-cut answers, just flawed people making flawed decisions. This just doesn't feel like Star Wars. That kind of show right there. Star Wars is built on moral convictions, clear-cut definitions between good and evil. Not this sort of moral grey area that we're seeing more and more in pop culture, which people don't like, generally speaking, and I think it's a terrible message for young people. It says, whether Jedi or Sith-ish or something in between, it was a unique storytelling mode for the galaxy far, far away, expanding upon the brief Rashomon-esque Luke and Kylo flashbacks in The Last Jedi, to deliver a multifaceted story boasting stark revelations, critiques of the Jedi Order, a sympathetic view of the personal betrayals that might draw an individual to the dark side, and real personal pain. That pain is now felt by the Acolytes. The show will not return for season 2. It feels like a massive mistake. Look, again, this whole reinterpretation of morality in the show, this moral relativism that we've seen in pop culture more and more in recent years, it isn't a good message, and above all, it's not Star Wars, and people want Star Wars, the wholesomeness, the moral wholesomeness of Star Wars. Ultimately, morals, principles, values, these things are supposed to be universal, and they're not supposed to change. Ultimately, the plot and characters weren't compelling. So there you have it. So anyway, later on in the article, it says, there are concerns too that The Acolyte ending abruptly will inadvertently embolden the darker side of the Star Wars fandom. It's undeniable they exist, loud in voice, probably smaller in number than their presence suggests, but before a single frame of The Acolyte had emerged, they were perpetuating a narrative against the show, that it was woke, whatever the hell that actually means, that it would be the end of Star Wars, that it was anti-George Lucas, that it was going to ruin the Jedi. The show's mere existence, before it actually existed, caused ire in the worst corners of online discourse. These are, it sounds like just people you disagree with, but anyway, these are not people who watched the show and didn't like it, a valid response for some viewers. Well, I did actually watch the first episode, and it was absolutely horrific. These are people who didn't like it before they'd even seen it. And here's the thing, they have a right to feel that way, you know? After all, a trailer is supposed to, sell a show or a movie to people, to promote it, to market it, to entice people to want to go to see it. And if they don't like what they see, they're going to comment on it and they're not going to watch it. So they have a right to express that opinion, by the way. They do have a right to hold that opinion, whether you like it or not. It says, it won't be the intended effect, but these obnoxious and unwelcome voices will only feel vindicated by the Acolyte's premature ending. So to Ben Travis, who wrote this article, Ben, why do you think the show was cancelled? There are so many franchises that I can think in recent years that have taken a similar creative and ideological direction to the Acolyte. And what happens is fans have become very good at detecting it early on. In trailers, for example. And typically speaking, these kinds of shows go on to have low ratings because very few people are watching. As for your statement, but those obnoxious and unwelcome voices will only feel vindicated by the Acolyte's premature ending, at the end of the day, call those people whatever you want, label them what you like, they weren't wrong. Many of them called it correctly, that the Acolyte would be cancelled. And it was cancelled. But it wasn't cancelled by some obnoxious and unwelcome darker side of the fan base. It was cancelled by Disney themselves. Maybe take it up with them. They were the ones putting up the money for the show, money that the show's ratings didn't justify being spent. Here's an article from Northern Global News written by Cody Mello Klein. Disney cancelling Star Wars The Acolyte sets a dangerous precedent and is bad news for the future of Star Wars in Hollywood, expert says. Wow, that's a bold statement there. But then again, this person is an expert, so they probably know better than most of us. Disney's decision to cancel The Acolyte after one season reinforces the toxicity, hear that term a lot, toxicity, toxic fandom, you hear that over and over again, reinforces the toxicity in its own fan base and will limit the stories that will be told in the galaxy far, far away, a Northeastern fandom expert says. I'm going to skip a few paragraphs down here, but the full article is linked for you to check out below. For anyone familiar with modern fandom, the internet and Star Wars specifically, it should come as no surprise. Star Wars fans have review-bombed movies and shows that center women and people of color in their favorite franchise. They have harassed actors until they leave social media. What is new is that Hollywood might be listening to them, says Steve Granelli, an associate teaching professor of communication studies at Northeastern University who specializes in fan culture dynamics. There's a section of the fan base that is limiting the types of stories that are told and the types of characters that the wider fan base is going to have access to, and I don't think that bodes well for the Star Wars franchise moving forward, Granelli says. Okay, how are they limiting the types of stories being told? By simply expressing their dissatisfaction with them. Should fans have the right to express their dislike of stories in their favorite franchises or not? To me, this is a question of freedom of speech at this point, and I don't think people should be condemned for having an opinion that some people don't like, and they shouldn't be belittled for being toxic. It just feels so sanctimonious to me. It says toxic fandom, which exists in almost every major fan base, from Taylor Swift to Marvel, is what happens when, for example, a fan's love of Star Wars becomes less about their connection to the story of Luke Skywalker and more about how integral Star Wars is to their identity, says Joseph Riegel, an associate professor of communication studies at Northeastern who studies online communication and culture. That's when fandom tips from passion into a sense of ownership and results in fans defining who can and can't be a fan. Riegel says the internet has only amplified the kind of gatekeeping that exists in some fan communities. This is just nonsensical. I'm sorry, but who has ever said who can and cannot be a fan of something? If a show looks terrible and then turns out to be terrible, the fans are going to tell you. And it's going to be reflected in the ratings, which need to be sufficiently high enough to justify renewals of an expensive television series. It comes down to basic mathematics at a certain point. By the way, again, the full articles featured in this video are linked below for you to check out. Now, a few paragraphs down it says, Granelli says the Acolyte serves as a warning to the rest of the Star Wars fanbase and Hollywood as a whole. The reason for the cancellation doesn't even matter at this point. Yes, it does! We know why it was cancelled. It was cancelled because not enough people watched it. I mean, do you think that Hollywood, or indeed Disney or any of these big studios, should just make these shows out of charity or something? Do you know what I mean? Hollywood's not a charity. It is a business at the end of the day. There's a bottom line. And there has to be a justification, a return on investment for all of that money. I mean, the budgets for these shows are huge. And if they're not getting a return, the show isn't going to be renewed. And let's just imagine hypothetically for a moment that all of the fans who didn't like The Acolyte decided en masse to simply ignore it and never discuss it online at all. And the only people talking about it online were the people who loved it. You know what would happen in that case? The show would still be cancelled, because the people who did watch it and like it weren't in significant enough numbers to justify the extremely expensive television series being renewed. Ultimately, the failure to listen to what the majority of fans want, whether you like their attitude or not, is the reason why shows like The Acolyte get cancelled, because most fans, male or female, straight, gay, whatever, most of them didn't want a show like The Acolyte to be greenlit in the first place, and they could tell how bad it was going to be from how bad the trailers looked. This next article is from Forbes.com. I think it's a very good take from Eric Kane. The very obvious reason Disney cancelled The Acolyte, it wasn't toxic dude bros. There has been much gnashing of teeth and rending of garments over the past week over the cancellation of The Acolyte by Disney. The Star Wars series will not live beyond its first season, and it's unclear whether any of the characters or storylines set up in Season 1 will be carried on anywhere else. I do think that the Stranger was a good character, and I'd be happy to see him again in some other capacity. Darth Plagueis was spotted toward the end of the season, and I'd certainly like to see more of him. But the show itself was not a hit largely because it was poorly written, riddled with plot holes, had very uneven acting from its various leads, and looked cheap despite its enormous cost. And while some outlets want to paint the cancellation as a win for toxic dude bros, as if no women could possibly have disliked The Acolyte, exactly, and others are saying that its failure will cause Disney to avoid trying new things, I think the real culprit is twofold. The show was far too expensive and did not draw big enough numbers to justify the cost. The show was far too expensive and did not receive enough critical acclaim and widespread fan support. Exactly. And I think that's a very fair and reasoned assessment. So, guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you very much for watching. Please hit that like button, subscribe for more. Take care. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.